Good morning. Welcome to the 44th Annual Preaching with Power, and to our lecture doing Preaching with Power, our speaker, the Reverend Dr. Marquisha Scott. As each year, in all my excitement, I usually write notes. Most of you know that I follow a manuscript, and I wrote notes. I did. I just didn't bring them downstairs with me. So I'm going to try to do this one by heart. But I always like to make acknowledgments at the beginning as we prepare. And not sure how the camera will show this on our live stream that it's going out on YouTube, and that means people are watching now and people will watch later. But I want to recognize persons that are in our midst. So I am going to ask all of our students to stand, and keep standing, students who are present. Any of our students, please stand. And as they stand, our alumni that are present, all alumni, would you please stand? All alumni. Thank you. As you keep on standing, because you know your parts, keep standing. It's exercise. It's exercise. Keep standing. All of our faculty that are present, would you please stand? And then all of our staff, if you would please stand. And if there are members of Utica that are not part of that, would you please stand? Okay, let's give them all a hand. This is Utica as well as Board of Trustees for United Lutheran Seminary, Miss Tracy Beasley. We have had an exciting time so far. I do want to testify today that I love how people blame the Holy Spirit on some stuff all the time, almost like what certain people are doing in Christianity today, giving Christ a real bad name. But I kept getting these calls. Quentin, are you going to cancel tonight? Talking about last night. I'm like, I'm not feeling it. I don't think that storm going to be as bad as they say it's going to be. And I want you to know we met last night, had good attendance, and had a great time. And if you missed it, just go out there. Grace Baptist Church of Germantown is on their Facebook page. It'll be on our YouTube channel, hopefully in another day. But a wonderful experience, and I am so glad. I don't know if I should, I don't know. I like to give the Holy Spirit credit for that, but just something on the inside just kept saying, it's not as bad as they say. It's not. And then they canceled, said, well, it's not going to be a tornado. And it was windy. It got more windy last night when I went to bed than it was during the service stuff. So, yeah. So I just wanted to testify. Thank y'all for letting me have that moment. As we proceed forward, I would like to invite the president of our seminary, the Reverend Dr. Irwin, to come, and he will bring welcome and greetings on behalf of United Lutheran Seminary.
Good morning. Welcome to all of you. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to have our students and faculty and alumni and friends here together, not just for the revival spirit events of the evenings that we have during Preaching and Power, but also for some education and a time of learning. We're grateful to Dr. Marquisha Scott for a lecture today, which is to come. We're also glad to be able to honor a couple of students who are among our best at this event. And so in the name of the seminary and all of its people, I bid you welcome and thank you for being here.
Our dean is not present with us at the moment, but I would like to ask to join us so when we take this group picture, and I promise you, I want you all to come and snap pictures. I can't take a picture of myself and be here at the same time, so send me, please feel free to walk up. If there's friends and family that we're about to, please come up, take a picture, I promise you. But I am going to ask Dr. Wayne Croft, our Jeremiah Wright Professor of Homiletics and Liturgics and African American Studies, to come and stand with us, along with the pastor of the Mount Zion Baptist Church of Germantown. This scholarship and merit award today is named in honor of the Reverend J. Quentin Jackson, who was the former pastor of Mount Zion Baptist Church, and Reverend J. Gardner is the current pastor of Mount Zion Baptist Church of Germantown. And so at this time, our president will do the honors of inviting our honorees today.
This award was established in honor of the Reverend J.Q. Jackson, who in 1949 was one of the first two African Americans to earn a master's degree, a Master's of Sacred Theology, in that case, together with the Reverend Jeremiah A. Wright, Sr. They both received the degree from the seminary in Philadelphia here. This award that we give every year is awarded to African American students in the Black church concentration of the Eden Theological Institute, the ones with the highest cumulative grade point average, and who are preparing for ministry in one of the denominations that's represented here in the UTI constituency. The first is June Daniel Bradshaw. Please come up.
We're gonna take a picture together.
And the other is Xavier Forney. Please come up.
Hey, let's do this with Dr. Croft. I'll get on the end. All right. Who's taking pictures? Come closer. You don't have to be scared. Come. Please, you're too far away. Come close. Come. Everybody send me a copy. Thank you. Congratulations. Congratulations to you. I was a part of it. Take mom out to lunch. One more hug. Thank you, President Irwin. Thank you, Dr. Crawford. Thank you, Pastor Gardner. It gives me great honor to introduce our lecturer today. And I have some notes here that I want to read, but on a personal note, let me just say that Dr. Marquisha Scott is impressive. She's so impressive that when I served as interim pastor of the historic First Baptist Church, Philadelphia, founded in 1698, and they wanted some preachers to come. And I said, well, you don't have to be a preacher to do Women's Day, right? They said, well, no. And they really wanted Dr. Phaedra Blocker, who's sitting, her calendar was booked. She couldn't come. I said, I have somebody. And when I brought Dr. Scott down there, they were like, oh, she can come back anytime. That's on a personal note, but let me give you the professional introduction. Dr. Marquisha Lawrence Scott is an associate professor in the Graduate School of Social Work at the University of Denver, where her scholarship sits at the intersection of faith, justice, and community transformation. A public theologian and social work scholar, Dr. Scott integrates Black religious thought, community-based research, and applied ethics to explore the evolving role of religious congregations in addressing social inequities. She holds a PhD in social welfare from the University of Pennsylvania with dual master's degrees, Master's of Social Work, that is from Washington University in St. Louis, and the Master of Divinity from Eden Theological Seminary, also in St. Louis. Dr. Scott currently serves also as the director of the Listening Lab at Morgan State University Center for Religion and Cities, and as a research consultant for the BTS Center Eco Preachers Cohort. But what I want to say at the end is her connection to family. I see Dr. Marsha Brown Woodard here, and she gave a presentation this past September, and in that presentation was a picture of a little girl. And that little girl is here because her mommy is here. So she's rooted in her own faith journey. Dr. Scott brings a commitment to prophetic imagination, scholarly rigor. She is grounded in love and partnership of her husband, the Reverend Dr. Anthony Scott, who is the pastor of the Reformation Lutheran Church here in Philadelphia. And together they have one daughter who is the most beautiful expression of their shared hope for the world. Would you help me to receive our lecturer today, Dr. Marquisha Lawrence Scott?
Good morning. Thank you all for the opportunity to stand here today. and be a part of the Eden Theological Institute's great work on Black preaching and theology. Dr. Q, thank you again for the invitation and for the encouragement to listen to the Lord. President Irwin, thank you. And thank you to the Reformation family who is here. And I really appreciate that, especially my husband, who is the pastor, the Reverend Dr. Anthony Lawrence Scott, on this, our 10th anniversary of our engagement. This is special. And our beloved daughter, Sadie, whose future I hope is made better because of the work of her parents. And the Reverend Dr. Marsha Brown Woodard for her prayers as I have been working out this project, and just for being faithful in her day as others have been in theirs. And a special thank you to the hundreds of congregants and pastors who have allowed me in their space over the last decade, whether that is through interviews or surveys, secondary data observations. I don't take that commitment and participation lightly. So for over a decade now, I have been studying congregations from St. Louis to Philadelphia to Detroit, Denver, DC, walking their neighborhoods, sitting in their fellowship halls, listening in on their sacred circles and conversations. And much of what is reported in the wider Christian church space is this story of decline, more nuns, younger people who are less religious, buildings are in decay, AI writes the sermons, You've seen those stories in that line of thinking. And that's a story that so many of the news outlets and denominational reporting and data leans to. But there is a depth from actually being with people and talking to them that is missed when we only kind of take what's on the reports, especially because it kind of feels good sometimes, even when it's negative, that we can be encouraged to say, oh, well, we're justified because our local story matches what everybody's already saying, right? And so these are some of the news clippings that you all probably have read and have seen. And it's a narrative that many of us know well, right? It is headlines about church decline, stories about empty sanctuaries, predictions about the end of institutional religion. And the headlines circulate widely, and over time, they begin to shape how congregations understand themselves. And people begin to say, it's the inevitable. The writing is on the wall, right? And so the news says we can only get this far, but we will not act as if the decline and shifts and deferred maintenance on these buildings and aging congregations isn't happening, right? So we're not going to act like we don't see that. What is being reported is not the truth, right? And so, but before we go into where we're going, I want to tell you where we're not going to be able to go today. The moment that we're in, what we see in the news and in data sets in our congregations is not a Matthew 6, don't worry moment. This is, we know that famous scripture that we are all drawn to that says, look at the birds in the air, consider the lilies of the field, right? And in this Gospel of Matthew, Jesus is telling us essentially, consider the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. These are images meant to release our anxiety, right? And to tell us that God cares, to remind us, don't be concerned or overly concerned. But the moment that we find ourselves in, congregations, institutions, individuals alike, it requires what we consider the fig moment. Yeah. And before I say this, we think about considering the lilies of the field. That's the one that's comforting, right? That's the one that's like, you know what? I'm just going to go to sleep because the birds of the air, okay? But these passages tell us, right, that's something beautiful, right? That we don't need to live in this constant anxiety. God is caring for creation. But the fig is a little different. right? The fig makes us a little uncomfortable. And so when this was coming to me, I'm like, when you say the fig, the people get, this is not, because in the Gospels, the fig is always under scrutiny. The fig is inspected, the fig is questioned, the fig is always on some kind of improvement plan, and sometimes the fig is even threatened of being cut down, right? And so we know that in Luke's gospel, the owner comes with the fruit, that story, looking to find something, and there is none. And in Mark's gospel, Jesus even curses a fig tree that appears to be full but isn't producing anything, right? That's what we know about the fig. So the fig lives in this different theological space. The fig is not about passive reassurance. The fig is about discernment. The fig asks, what is actually happening here? What is growing? What is not? What needs care? What needs time? And if we're honest, that kind of examination can make us uneasy. But the truth is, anything that we truly care about, it deserves time, it deserves space, and sometimes it even deserves a little scrutiny. So, if the congregation matters, if the community matters, if the tradition matters, then it deserves more than nostalgia or panic. It deserves careful attention for where we are right now. And so assessing this work that I'm doing now and presenting to you all first is this Consider the Fig space. I'm thinking about congregational sociology of discernment, of what that might look like. And this framework emerges from three places: from my years of congregational research, theological reflection, and from the wisdom of ancestors. Ancestors who built churches when they could not build homes, who built churches when they were excluded from public life, who built churches because they needed spaces of connection, survival, and dignity. And when the times changed, they adjusted. They assessed, they discerned. And sometimes they had to ask hard questions about what faithfulness required in a new season. And so before we talk about congregational life today, before we talk about decline narratives and buildings and neighborhoods, we will get there, we have to learn how to do something that the gospel invites us to do, and that is consider the fig. And interestingly enough, the fig itself has something to teach us, because botanically, the fig does not produce fruit the way that most trees do. All right, so we're going to do a little botany today, just a little bit. And I don't want us to get lost in the horticulture of the whole thing, but I do want us to understand just enough about the fig to understand why this conceptualization matters. Most fruit blooms in ways that we can see, right? Strawberry season is coming. It'll be April through July, and they'll have that cute little white flower that shows up to say, my strawberries are coming in. So all the gardeners on Instagram, they've been in their garden saying, look, girl, my strawberries, my blueberries are coming in. Because you see not the fruit, but the little flower that says something is coming, right? So it's announcing that what's coming. But the fig is different. The fig's flowers develops inside the fruit structure itself. The fig is a structure that holds the flower within. So in other words, the fig does not bloom for public display. The real development is happening inside. And the fig tree also has these different rhythms. So many produce 2 sets of crops during the harvest. So the first, everyone's super excited. Oh, the crop is going to come in, but it's from the previous season's growth, that first round. So what we had left over is coming in now. And the one that's coming, the second round, will actually be for the current season. So we have that past and that present coming in the fig, which means something important, because if you do not understand the rhythms of the fig, you might misjudge the tree. You may call it barren when it's simply in between seasons. And so before we decide the future of the tree, we must understand the season of the fig, right? And that is exactly the tension that we encounter in the Gospel of Luke, that common story where the gardener is in the vineyard, right? Luke 13 tells us, Jesus tells a story of a man who had a fig tree planted in his vineyard. He comes looking for fruit and finds none. After 3 years, he says, cut it down. Why should it be wasting soil? And this is not a sentimental question, right? This is an evaluative question. This is a question of purpose, a question of fruitfulness, a question of whether something is taking up space without producing what it was supposed to produce. Are we wasting our time? But before grabbing the axe, the gardener says, give it one more year. Let me dig around. Let me fertilize it. And also notice what does not happen. The gardener doesn't deny that there is a lack of fruit. The gardener does not pretend that everything is fine. The gardener also doesn't shame the tree and say, oh, this old raggedy tree. The gardener digs. There's diagnosis before the decision, yeah? And after years of sitting inside congregations, I have come to believe that we have often reached for the axe when the shovel is the more suitable tool. Yeah. These are a couple of studies that I've published over the last 6 months or so. First one, Challenging Times in Troubled Waters, based in Philadelphia, and Smoke Signals from the Church Stoop, based out of work in Washington, D.C. And so because my work has involved engaging congregations in a number of different ways, whether that's surveys, interviews, collaborative projects, longer-term congregational partnerships, two research experiences in particular, these two, helped me crystallize this consider the fig moment. The first in Philadelphia was happening during 2021, 2022, in the midst of the pandemic and us also trying to come out of it, right? It was that weird, everybody was on Zoom still, and well, I guess we kind of still on Zoom, right? But at this time, I was conducting interviews with clergy and youth leaders, some of them are in this room, across the city, asking fairly straightforward questions. You know, where's the congregation right now? What are you hearing? What are your concerns? What is the community facing? What's going on in your neighborhood? And this external narrative at the moment was clear. It's the one that we saw on those news lines of churches were declining, attendance was down, congregations were struggling financially. As the pandemic was moving along, people weren't sure where they were in the whole mix, right? But quiet as it's kept, that was the feeling before the pandemic. But now we're having this, conversation about it a little bit more. And to be clear, many of those pressures were very real. But what I heard in those interviews kind of complicated what seemed like a straightforward, simple story. That these pastors and youth leaders in Philadelphia were not simply retreating. They weren't saying that things are not going well. They were still asking about how could they be value-added institutions in their neighborhoods. They were collaborating with local organizations. They were sharing resources with each other. They were rethinking programming. Trying to respond to, community needs that had become more visible during the pandemic. So even in a moment that looked like decline and in many ways felt like decline, there was this great deal of adaptive ministry and community commitment that was happening beneath the surface. And then in Washington, D.C., I approached things a little bit differently with that group. Instead of meeting with multiple clergy around D.C., I hung out for about a year with one congregation and to do this deeper study. And that meant spending time in the church building, walking the surrounding neighborhood, touring the space with members, talking with people in nearby restaurants and shops, listening to how the congregants and neighbors understood the church's presence in what they considered a changing neighborhood, a changing community. And so really dialing in. And what became clear was that what looked like this kind of simple institutional stress from the outside questions about buildings and neighborhood change and finances was actually layered with something deeper. There were these questions of legacy, questions of grief, of adequate stewardship, and long-term responsibility. And so, in other words, what appeared to be obvious conclusions on the surface look very different when you spend time digging deeper. And this is where that fig metaphor becomes helpful, because the fig trees, as with congregations, the question is rarely, is there any fruit? The deeper question is likely, what season are we actually in, and what is needed with where we are, right? And so from the outside or on the surface level readings, that narrative looks pretty straightforward, right? We have attendance declining, buildings aging, neighborhoods, demographics shifting. But when we begin digging into the data with interviews and surveys and observation, the story becomes more complicated and more nuanced. So yes, the spreadsheets were showing institutional stress. The math was not mathing. So when you look at it only on the paper, you're like, okay, well, something needs to happen here. But the congregations themselves, in their experiences and spending time with them, were telling a different story. So in Philadelphia, I saw congregations quietly holding neighborhoods together. They were caring for elders, they were feeding families, they were maintaining sacred space and gathering together, even while external narratives framed them as irrelevant or out of touch. And in congregation in Washington, D.C., the numbers on the spreadsheet were not wrong, so to speak. They just didn't tell the full story. They were incomplete, right? Because underneath the structural concerns, the building question, the financial anxiety, there was this unresolved grief that was really at the center of that depth, where I'm like, why can't they make a decision? There's this grief that's here that the numbers alone just won't carry. And so they were grieving over generations that had passed away, right? But who they still wanted to honor, right? I'm sitting there with folks who are in their 70s and 80s, and they were saying, the elders, the old folks paid for this building, right? And so you know, while others are saying, you should stop this and get rid of this and sell this, they were like, wait a minute, right? What do we do here? And so grief also showed up over the neighborhoods, and it had changed to what they not only they'd seen before, but they were seen as outsiders or the odd ones. Y'all just got here. What you talking about? You don't know if we still here, right? And so that was the spirit. And so, you know, folks were in the community when I'm talking to people at bars and smoke shops and restaurants. They're saying, oh, you know, they don't bother us. You know, I forgot that they were there. Don't bother you. You just got here, right? So this grief over identities that were shifting faster than they could respond to, and sometimes shifting faster than they could even name. And so when that grief remains unnamed, then we see institutions often can look weaker than they actually are. And we found that they were trying to cycle back in programs that would never work in their current climate, right? But we certainly saw that internal shadow work was actually needed. But there is this pressure that makes doing grief work or slow, more intimate work more difficult for individuals and institutions. That work is difficult because we live in what we call a spectacle economy, which is a term coined in the 1960s by a French Marxist theorist, Guy Debord. And this spectacle economy is where visibility becomes the main form of legitimacy, right? Where if you can see it, it's good. If it's not on Instagram, it didn't happen, right? We have those conversations. I forgot my Apple Watch at home, so this workout doesn't even really count, right? So we know this narrative. And so growth in this kind of space becomes a moral evidence. So scale becomes success. Is it more of this and more of that? And, you know, congregations, just like any corporation or institution, feel that same pressure. And so if the sanctuary isn't full, if the numbers aren't rising, if the live stream isn't polished, right, then, you know, people say the writing is on the wall, right? And so underneath that, though, I think is a real trapping that we have to address and hopefully resist, is what I've seen over the years in the headlines and this in church basements is this assumption of inevitability. That decline is inevitable, closure is inevitable, irrelevance is inevitable. And sociologist Tracy McMillan Cottom often she offers this helpful reframe on this language of inevitability. She says, when people try to sell you on the idea that the future is already settled, it is because it is deeply unsettled. If they can get us to accept that the future is already settled, already here, the end is already here, then we will create that for them. And she says that her most daring idea about that is to refuse. Cottom is talking in her work, in this specific quote, about technology and power. But the logic she names is recognizable in conversations with church life as well. We are told that the future of congregations is already settled. The closure is inevitable. The story is almost or already over. You have stayed longer than we expected you to. And that there is no next generation. But the situations with the congregations that I've studied and that I've sat with, it does not look inevitable. They look complicated. They look wounded. They look tired. They look adaptive. They look like they are discerning what faithfulness looks like in this time. And that is why I find this language of the fig tree so helpful, because the fig tree is not judged from a distance, right? It is inspected. The gardener has to look closely. Is this tree barren or is it simply out of season, right? Don't cut it down. We got to dig first. And so in this digging deeper, some of the questions that farmers will ask about, or gardeners will ask about fig trees, is what season is the tree in? What fruit is it bearing? Who is inspecting it? By what standards are they inspecting it? What timeline are they on? And that to me felt like the same type of questions that we could be asking in our congregations, is what season are we in? What were we planted here to do? And has that changed? What would faithfulness look like here and now? What is not bearing fruit and why? And what inevitability narrative are we refusing? And what is one faithful action we can take? I put 90 days because I like you to put a little timeline on stuff, right? And I also say one thing, because the discernment must be manageable. Everything is so fast, and we can't give anything a little room to breathe. And so if you're going to be, going to put anything into practice, there needs to be a little room, right, for the clarity and for you to spend the time really digging in and seeing what is this underneath. And so as I am getting close to the end here, I want us to really implore you all to consider the fig with me. And remember that the gardener in Luke's gospel doesn't simply do something, spectacular in what we would consider. He's just going to look at it. He's a gardener. Of course he should. But quite honestly, in our fast-paced spectacle society, it was kind of remarkable to just say, okay, let me just look at it. When others would have went for the axe, the gardener reached for the shovel and says, let's dig. Let's see what's going on here. And perhaps that is the word for the church today in this anxious time. Let's dig. Let's see what is here, not to panic, not comparison, not spectacle. Dig where we are planted, naming the season that we are in or not in. Discern what the fruit is. There are some congregations that I have sat in, and they are 12 people who know each other deeply and love each other fiercely. And then they're giving things out to their communities and showing up and being engaged. They're not going to have any TikTok slides coming up for them. But the spaces in their specific community at the time where they're supposed to be is there, because people still show up and knock on their door and say, I need food to feed my children. Right? And so if they're not there, it matters. And so this concept of really resisting the inevitability is so important because what we build should make sense for where we are. So based on our call for this time, that we would be faithful to what our season, what our call, what our fruit is to be, even if we are in between seasons, even if we don't understand. I encourage you all to consider the fig, consider the fig, consider the fig. Amen.
She carried out the assignment. She did it so timely. We have time for Q&A. How many have been here in the past where we couldn't do Q&A? Well, yeah, the professor is in the house. Thank you so much. What I did not say in my introduction and what really prompted me to invite her this year is the Eden Theological Institute received a $1.1 million grant from Lilly, where we're working with Oikos, or Institute for Social Impact. We have 14 congregations that are working with us right now to look at what they can do to make a difference in their community. We finished our courses with them. It was a little too late, but we got to bring you in some kind of way. And because of some of the work that I do with churches, and many of you who work on denominational levels or judicatory levels, you know that we are closing churches every year, literally. And you scared me. So I don't know if this is a question, but this is my question. Then we'll open up. And if we can bring that microphone, someone can bring that microphone and put it here in the center for those who ask questions. Please just identify yourself and ask your question. You mentioned that we may put the axe too early when we should have done the shovel. And I need to meet with a congregation next month that's looking at less than 10 members and saying we can't afford to keep this building anymore. And how do I help them? Do they use the axe? Or do they use the shovel? I just want to see if you can just highlight a little bit that. Yeah.
Oh, that's fun. So just giving this example of a 10-person group, people are in buildings that are largely underutilized, that are running them into the ground, right? We've all seen this, right? Even if you're like, oh, I got this beautiful house, and then you're like, girl, I got 5 bathrooms that I have to clean. This is wild. Right? It's just too much. And so the assessment is, what can this building do? Right? Is it the building, or is it us gathering in this space? And so I'm sure you all have heard all about the readaptive use and all those different things that are there. And, there's a lot of community-based work that could be happening. We see congregations turning parts of their building into affordable housing. We see people renting out spaces, doing different things like that. But that takes a lot of energy. And it takes some savviness. Somebody has to run the numbers. Everybody don't have Sister Tracy, right? Somebody has to know what they're doing, right? And so a lot of times where collaboration can come in and say, all right, do we work with Partners for Sacred Spaces? Are other folks doing this? Are there nonprofits who are doing well and they just need offices for the rest of their group instead of them building a new building? Are we in the same community? Are there's anyone in the community? So there is a lot of digging that could happen. But most of the time what we see is that people, they gather in the space and they really just come in and they share the same stories that they have shared always. And they haven't really done digging in a way that is helpful. Right, they stay on that surface space and kind of say, okay, if we can bring in one person or we could have one conversation, what might that look like? And I never want to be in a space where I'm like, every place won't survive it, right? But it might just look different, right? It could be that you are doing your most faithful work by saying, in this time right now, the rent is $1,800 for the one bedrooms for the people, right? People are so if you can figure out how to manage and support people in these other ways, that might be the call. Or we use this for something else, right? So everything, I think that there just has to be a reevaluation, right? A renegotiation of who we are, and honestly just doing what seems the most faithful, right? Not just acting as if nothing is happening and going on day to day. So that gets to us.
Are there any other questions? Please come and identify yourself.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for your provocative and helpful talk. I'm John Paul from the faculty. I'm a historian, so I'm particularly interested in context. One of the projects I'm working on right now is a book on trees in the history and theology of Christianity, right? So this spoke to me on many levels.
I'm on sabbatical. I've been reading books on trees all sabbatical. So
we should talk more then, I think. Anyway, the fig, and here's my question about context.
Yeah.
The fig was a sacred tree in the Roman Empire,
right,
and was often a representation of empire, which may be wise. There's some of the ambivalence in Scripture about it. But I wonder how our current imperial context shapes the kind of patterns that you're seeing in congregations. And if you could speak to that.
Absolutely. And so one of the things thank you for that question. The fig is oftentimes used in biblical stories because they were everywhere, right? It was like a common tree. It's a common, as common as, we don't have many common, you know what I mean? But as apple tree, right? That's an apple tree, right? You can see that, and they're everywhere, right? And so it was also a sign of abundance and security and safety. And, we have heard those spaces that everyone would sit under their own fig tree, right? In the times when things are going well. And however, what we have found is that there are folks that don't want everybody to have their own tree, right? They want all the trees. And so going back to Dr. Cottom's notation on resisting inevitability, it is this idea that we don't have anything left, that we have used up all of our resources, but is essentially wealthy people wanting to see how much they can control, right? And how much you're going to work it out for them by giving it up, or, not even thinking about it, or not being focused there. So I think in our society, we look at this tree in these multiple ways. But one of them is, I think, a lesson in discernment, as I've, discussed here. So it is, some congregations will not survive, and that will be the most dignified thing to do. It'll be the most honorable thing to do, right? But then there will be other places where it will have been a money grab, and people will have cheated them out of the call, the space, the honor, the dignity, right? And so that's why I say everybody, whether it's big or small, should be doing that dig, because while we see it as sacred, while we see it as places that have gathered as a testament to where we raised our children and where we got married and where we learned how to, cook or do whatever, right? Where we were gathering together. For other people, it is just a place that we're a property. We're just waiting for it to fall, right? And so if you don't protect it, and it feels, in my paper that I wrote on DC, on the stoop, when you're talking to people around, those conversations, we see it as sacred. So I went into that building in DC, I fell in love with it. It had those old DC doors, the pocket doors, but they were floor to ceiling pocket doors. It handcrafted, and I'm just like, this is amazing, right? And so I'm in love with this building because I see this as sacredness. And before I even went to meet with the congregation, the person that I connected with beforehand, who was more of our like my liaison at the congregation. I'm like, I know these people. I've never met them, but I know them, right? They get together. They make black eyed peas and collard greens on New Year's. I know these people, right? And so I recognize that I am connecting with them and that I have a good hope for them. But when I'm walking around their neighborhood, that same hope is not there. And and so like I've said, I've been talking about this work on ancestors, and I've been like, I just want to make our ancestors proud, this and the other. And it's like, hey, those who seek to destroy, they also have ancestors, and their ancestors also want them to, And so it is an unfortunate space because we see it as sacred, we see it as holy, but in some spaces they just see it as property. It's just money, and it can get it like anybody else can get it in that same way. And then what it does is try to encourage you or encourage congregations of their irrelevance, of no one needs this. But when somebody dies, where is the rabbi? Is the first conversation, right? Where are you going to bury your dead? Where are people supposed to gather? There is still there. There's conversations every day about third space. Where are all of our third spaces? What do you mean? We have them everywhere. Do they function the way that we want them to? Maybe that's what we need to shift. Maybe that's what we should do. I can go on and on about this question, but hopefully I got there with you and we can wrap trees later.
Dr. Anthony Scott, pastor of Reformation Lutheran Church in the city of Philadelphia, brotherly love and sisterly affection and sibling synergy. The father of Sadie, the husband of Marquisha. Anyway, here's my question. You talked a lot about digging, but you haven't discussed the manure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's going to get nasty in there. Yeah.
Tell us some about your idea of the manure. What sticks? What will end up fertilizing us?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I did not ask him for that question.
I would not have.
You know what I'm saying? So, but no, I think it's a beautiful question, and I think that it matters here. Because what you're gonna dig, it's not gonna be like a sweet smell, right? It's not going to be fantastic, right? So that's why a lot of the times when I'm in congregations, when I work with them, I will go to meetings, I'll go to a service, this, and the other, but I kind of step back, right? Because these people have to be together when I'm back in Philadelphia, right? So I come in and not take the heat, so to speak, but coming in and saying, all right, let's dig here. This is what I'm seeing, and put it back to them. So this congregation that I'm talking about in Washington, D.C. as an example, we began to dig deep. They went back into their church in 2024 after the pandemic. That's a year and a half after everybody else. And so I'm like, why did y'all go back in? And they talked about the church as, they were like, the church was sick. There was mold. There were some things in that stuff that needed help. They didn't feel safe going in. And so I'm like, okay, well, that's a conversation to have. And so they went and they got all the mold and everything cleaned out. And so people still weren't coming back. And so it's like, do you not trust that the mold is actually gone? Have you lost the fervor? Do you not want to be here? Like, what is the thing? Everybody said, oh no, we want the building. I'm just not coming in. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? Because if you're not using the building, why do you want it? But really, it's like the old folks paid for this building. This building was a stop on the Underground Railroad. This space has great historical value. And so all of that is coming up. But really, I want the prestige, but I don't want the responsibility. And that was dug up because we just kept going and say, okay, well, how can you have it this way and that way? Right? And it was not beautiful. But people who were like, I've been saying that, but that's people who've been coming in. and meeting with the person who was doing the excavation of all of the stuff, right? They were having that conversation. But also I found that everyone talked about the church in a personified way. It was always she. It was always, we love her so much. Oh, she has, she held us, she did this and that. And so it was always this very sacred space. And so when we were digging, it was not a lack of care. It was just that everybody was so tired. And they were tired in their real lives. They were tired at the church. They were just tired. And so that is oftentimes, back to the question that we had before, people are banking on you being tired, right? They are banking on you having run each other down, having run yourselves down, not having any room or any tolerance for space. But to say that also, it has to come from a stranger, because you're not going to say that to the person that you have to sit in the pew with every week, right? And so, even I do this work, and I'm a member of Reformation, but I would never do this work with my own congregation. I have to sit with people. I love them. They I go to see them when they're sick. I talk to them, they pass away. I want to be in the space. I don't want to be in the place where you're like, no, that's the lady who said we don't care. You know what I mean? It's like, no, we are a part of community together. And so I think with that digging, the manure oftentimes has to come with people who are helping you look at it from the outside, and also people who are willing to help you tell the truth. But the truth, not that they have conjured up, but the truth that we're just telling by being here together. And we know that many congregations, they gather together, but they spend years together sometimes, and they actually don't actually talk about the real thing. Right? They will complain about, we need this new thing, we need that new thing. And it's like, oh, well, then who called the person to get some bids? Nobody. Then we come back next month, it's the same conversation, right? And so then I say, well, if you do a to-do list, who's going to go and do that? It's kind of like, oh, if I do that, then it makes me more responsible. And I don't have the space in my life to be responsible. But that's also a sad thing to say when I also value this space, right? And so having those conversations is really important. And so that's why most of the time I say, let's talk about one or two things. Because once you start going down the trail and with too many things, it just makes, and you know how people are smart. They'll just start back and forth talking about nothing. Cut it out, right? And so that's what I'm there to do, to say, cut it out. Nicely, of course, right?
So we got 3 more questions.
Okay.
We'll end on these 3. Thank you all.
Hi, I'm Lori Garcia. I'm a student in the MDiv program. Thank you very much. This has real value. And, you pointed out that when people do discernment, often it's only internal. Such good Lutheran ways of having lots of committee meetings that get us nowhere. And so I wonder if you could speak to how we connect to our communities, that discernment gets outside the church doors to understand better if we're going to be a part of the community, because often, right, we've closed ourselves off inside, how we would approach that and ways to do that in concert with the community.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that question. So one of the things that I always do when I work with the congregation, I'll just kind of like drive around, walk around, I go grab a coffee, I'll see if that's available. And most of the time I will try to take one person or 2 people from the congregation with me, and we'll just walk and we'll talk. And they're like, oh yeah, this person used to live here and they were, so we do that. And getting connected to the community is most of the time that first step, because they drive in, park their car, they go in and they come back out, but they have no concept of what the actual workings of the neighborhood is. So the article, it's free and available on the Revealer website, The Smoke Signals from the Church Stoop. I talk about kind of what that space looks like. So I walked around and I went to a couple open houses. I got coffee. I had some great Jamaican food. Right? And so just kind of going around and engaging. And what we recognized is that many people in the congregation had not lived in the space, right? Just kind of being around in it. Like, how does it function? How does it flow? So that's most of the time the first place. And then in the way that I did, I'm like, hey, I'm just working with this congregation right here. You know, I'm trying to just see, you know, a little bit more about how they engage, how you work. And there was a smoke shop across the street from the church. And smoke shop, they're selling weed, right? And when I knocked on the door, because you have to like get buzzed in or whatever, right? So I go in. They are so lovely. There's this beautiful green couch there that people are just sitting on, like hanging out. And the smoke shop owner described their space as a community gathering space. And so I said, oh, well, you know, would you all do something with the church? And they were like, we don't know if they would like us, but they're welcome to come, you know, they're welcome to hang out with us, right? And so it was interesting, their framing. They came here because they're like, obviously want to make money, but we also want to be like a chill place. And I'm seeing it in real time, like young people hanging out, like laughing, talking about the news, talking about books they were reading. And I'm like, this is what they do in the smoke shop, because that's not what they say on the outside. They say like, oh, you shouldn't go in there because it is the, you know, right? But it was not that. And on the same way, this is a, you know, it's DC, so it's a different neighborhood. Every neighborhood won't have one like this. So, and behind it, I go into get a tea from the coffee shop there, and there's a wedding happening at the coffee shop. And when I first went into that church, I said, it's this little beautiful small place where you can have like a 20-person wedding. I love a micro wedding. If you have a small wedding, invite me. Right? So it's like this small, sweet little space. And I said, somebody needs to get married up here. It is just so beautiful. Like right behind you is like all this stained glass and it's all these things. And so I said, oh my goodness, this is a wedding here today. So yeah, we're closing early because it was a couple in the neighborhood. They met in the neighborhood and they always come to get coffee here. So they just said, let's have our wedding here. But they passed the church just as much as they passed this coffee shop. And they didn't think to say, to ask for it, but it's because like the church's spaces were not available, right? Or they felt like, I don't know if I'm able to do that, right? So when it's community meetings, when it's, you know, showing up, you know, people are not going to necessarily knock on doors because people don't do that, right? But when I was walking and I see somebody sweeping their stoop, I just stop and just start chatting with them like a neighbor. But what I found is, honestly, in that specific space, most of the people didn't live in the neighborhood, so they would come and then leave. And then the pastor also had to work another job. So if he wasn't, you know, at that other job, coming back, you know, so it was a lot that was happening there. So there wasn't much time in the community, and trying to figure out the ways that the community communicates. So in Jenkintown, you know, just right down the road, there's a bookstore called Capricorn Books. The apartment above Capricorn Books caught on fire. Nobody was harmed, but the apartment is basically it's gone, right? And so that made all of the businesses up under it, they had to close because they're like, we have to do all these extra inspections to make sure it's safe for you all to go back in, right? And so across the street, the coffee shop and the taco shop reaches out to the people and say, I know y'all selling books. If you want to come here on the weekend and set up and sell books, and Sadie and I went and we got a few books and a few things. And I found all of this out because they were just communicating on their Instagram, right? And so how the neighborhood is communicating, are they emailing, are they texting, are there newsletters, are there whatever? And so that neighborhood just particularly happened to be, you know, that kind of thing. And so it's like, is that way that the church engages as well as being a part of those things? Are we offering our space up and say, hey, if y'all ever need a space, you know, you can come here. And it's not always easy. People don't always do that, right? Some places are a magnet for that kind of thing and other places are not. But like, what does that look like? And so I say spending time in the neighborhood, actually walking around, being a part. and understanding its flow, right? Similarly, we talked about the rhythms of the season that the figs are in. You have to understand like what's happening in this, this neighborhood here.
We do 2 questions, and then you answer them at the same time. So, yeah.
Okay.
So,
How many minutes do I have? Am I over?
time is it? Yeah, you over. So,
Over by 3 minutes.
yeah, that's it.
Okay.
That's all. But we're going to combine them, and then you're going to get this super answer for all
Okay.
of them. Next, and then next.
Dr. Scott, thank you for your presentation. I'll be very brief. So my church made the decision to sell its building about 3 years ago. And one of the things that this experience taught me or made me realize was how buildings are also a tool. Trying to articulate that to the members, right, and thinking about the historical legacy around African American churches and land and buildings and all of that thing. I think it causes us to see land and buildings and property differently.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, in terms of some of the things that you shared in your presentation, how does that historical legacy maybe impede us from doing the kind of work that you're suggesting?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question.
Gardner?
My name is Jay Gardner. I think my question's kind of close. So I think what I heard, Jay Gardner, Dr. Gardner. We know each other, so you know how it is. So I think I heard in the discussion the threat and danger of the disconnect and disregard of history relative to the fruit that we see. Okay? All right. So my question is, what is the place of congregations as the custodian of community history and the context for present and future? And then do congregations see themselves as such and the potential they
See themselves as
the holders of community history and legacy? And do they see themselves as the place for future?
Yes. Beautiful questions. I think that they go together quite well,
Yeah,
these
there's
two
a
questions.
complement, one
There's a
another.
compliment. One of the things that we talk about, coming from this DC congregation, I have another paper that we can discuss. I went in talking about assets and anecdotes, right? That's how I was trying to be cute. But when I got in there, what I recognized is that what they had was not something that needed to be assessed. What they had was this fragile inheritance. Right? It's an inheritance that they didn't quite know what to do. They knew that it was important, but they weren't quite sure of like how to manage it. And a big part of that is why are you feeling that way? And we ended up having conversations about the history of redlining, where Black people were not able to purchase homes, but they were able to put money toward purchasing a church, right? And so when the person says the old folks paid for this building, that's literally what happened, right? It's like we couldn't own a home, but we could own this space. Is a space of honor and dignity. And so that creates a space. It also, I saw there was a lot of fear in not understanding or not trusting the government and trusting things like, oh, you should have your building on a registry that, gives you more resources and money. They're like, and then they'll take the building from us and then we won't have it. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. But I'm like, but I see why you would think that, right? Because you have a history of things being taken, right? And so having that conversation is an important one. And to add about the history component, some congregations feel I found history being a part of their denominations was a conversation, but actually in their communities, it was a rare conversation that they would say, we're a part of this community, so however it changes, we will change. And so there is some theory that I have been playing around, a lot of Afrofuturistic theory that says, basically the core of Afrofuturism is that in the future, there will be Black people. And on my end, I think that in the future, there will be Black church, right? And so what does that look like? How do you gather that? It has to be right now, I think it's myself, scholars and things like that who are writing and trying to maintain and manage that history. So it's no coincidence that higher ed is under attack in so many ways because we keep writing stuff and keep saying stuff. And we keep having to remind the other, like groups that like, hey, this is the history that we have, and this is why this person might be messing up the meeting, right? They be like, oh, every time she comes, she just mess up the meeting and she just get the talking and carrying on. And she does carry on, but most of the time she's carrying on because there is a psychological fear that was steeped in, that is political, that is social, that has been passed down, whether she names it with that data or not. I help when I can there. And so that component is where we have to, I always say, have the kind of outsider to kind of help along and understand this is what's happening. That we have this trauma in the body, not because we just want to be cantankerous, but it's like because things have been taken. And sometimes we want to be cantankerous.
And we show our appreciation again. Thank you so much. Well done. Just 2 more minutes of your time. This evening, we will gather at the Reformation Lutheran Church, 1215 Vernon Road. The presiding bishop of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, Bishop Carey, is the preacher, so we invite you to come. Also on tomorrow in chapel at 11:45 a.m., the Dr. Leslie Callahan is the preacher, so we invite you to come and end with us on Wednesday evening at the St. Paul's Metropolitan AME Church in Lindbergh. Our former chair of Utica, the Reverend Dr. Janet Sturdivant, is preacher. On the screen now, if we will change on how to give, please let us show this. For those who are joining us online, it will give you the site on where to go, a QR code, and you would have given an envelope when you came in. I am grateful because I've seen an uptick in my online giving this year that I've never had in the past. Yeah, because we didn't provide a QR code. And we got a QR code now. All you got to do is just take out your phone and give online. But if you want to give something to help the scholarship, this is named after J.Q. Jackson, former pastor of Mount Zion Baptist Church of Germantown, one of our first African-American graduates. It helps all of our students in the Black church concentration. We help to offset all of their extra expenses, especially when it comes to books and supplies. So we appreciate all of your gifts. There's no gift too small, and the beauty is that you can keep on giving. You can set it up where you can give online on a regular basis. You don't have to just give one time. But if you cannot give today, take the envelope with you, send it back, and give online at any time that you would like. I want to close out, Dr. Scott, by saying you've given us some good preaching material. We're going to dig a little deeper on how to get a sermon out of Consider the Fig. I know the lecture was but I heard some preaching notes up in there. I'm not the only preacher in the room that said, well, let me see, I'm going to work this text a little different. It is just mind-boggling to me the number of years you can preach and just learn so many things like, is that what Jesus was saying back then? Because the truth be, our culture is totally different than theirs. And we always come with these 21st century lenses trying to force something on the text that's not there. And you opened my eyes. Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Let me end by saying to you all that I should have said at the beginning, Happy St. Patrick's Day. Look forward. Let us greet one another in fellowship, and I look forward to seeing you this evening. Thank you for your time. If you do have a gift, there are baskets in the back that you can leave your envelope in. Cool. No, but